Just a minute. Hello, Cynthia. Good afternoon.
Hello again, Andre.
Hello, Dora.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, you?
Okay. Are we live now? Yes. Okay.
Yes,
So, shall we start our what's scheduled for today?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So, hello. Good afternoon, everyone in Europe. Hello, everyone in the rest of the world. Welcome to the third day of the second international meeting, What If, by Universidade do Porto. I am André Coelho. I have the honor to present with your guests to the final round table of this event that is being broadcast on YouTube and YouTube channel and Facebook Casa da Música, Casa Comum page. I'm sorry. Okay, so let me introduce to you Professor Cynthia Montando. It's very difficult to say this name.
It's Montando, it's French.
Montando in French, okay. Addressing us today about the value of alternative stories in scenario planning. Cynthia is a professor and business consultant at UPAP in University of Mexico. Head of the Observatory of Competitiveness and New Ways of Working, postdoctorate in organizational leadership, 2 PhDs, 3 master degrees from prestige universities from the USA, Mexico, UK, and France. On your other screen, we have Professor Dora Dias from Faculty of Science of Universidade do Porto, Portugal, presenting us with Gaming with History, how history of science can be an alternative. Is this correct? Yeah, okay. So Professor Dora is a biologist, a specialist on biopharmaceutical sciences from University of Lisbon, and currently a PhD student at the University of Porto, analyzing the Human Genome Project in Portugal. So first, we're going to have the privilege to assist each other's presentations. Then we can have cross-reference dialogue between all of us. And at the end, if you wish to let us know your questions, we'll be glad to answer at the final round. I think we can start with Professor Dora. Can you please present about gaming with history, how history of science can be an alternative source for science communication storytelling?
Yeah, so I'll just share my screen then.
Okay.
Is it on?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So thank you for having me. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about my work and José's work. I'll start by telling a practical example of how you can use an episode from the history of science in Portugal, how to transform it into a board game that can be used to communicate science. In this case, we communicated chemistry. So why did we use a real story? A real story can make a deeper connection with your audience. And why did we transform it into a game, a board game? Well, games or board games are an effective learning tool, especially when addressing hard topics such as chemistry or ethics to a young audience. Our audience was 12 years old, or was students of 12 years old. So when choosing your story, your audience, like your client, is always right. So once your audience is stipulated, your story must be age appropriate, entertaining, especially for 12-year-olds, and what worked really well in our case, it must be unknown to your audience. Otherwise, they will lose you will lose their attention and interest. So we chose a story that was based in Portugal. It happened in Porto. We chose this story because our audience was mainly Portuguese, so it suited them. And this story was based in Porto in 1819. It was about a young medical doctor, a brilliant medical doctor from a rich family that suddenly was accused of poisoning his own nephew to obtain the money from the family. And Antonio Ferreira da Silva down there was the chemist that helped to resolve the case. He identified the poison, he and his team. And those pictures you see over here are real illustrations from the real persons. So this is what our characters look like in our game. They were specially designed for the 12-year-old audience. And we also added some extra elements so the storytelling would fit into our educational goals. So we put our game to the test just last year in Universidade Júnior. It was placed in the Faculty of Science in Porto. This game, we invited 280 students from the grades 7 and 8, and were divided into 80 teams. 80 teams. This game was played 20 times and it contained 5 hands-on experiences. So this game called Ethics Against Chemistry invited the students to learn this story in a fun and interactive way throughout role-playing. They play the part where they are science investigators and they have to investigate and solve this crime. They do that throughout a problem-based learning method. So these are our results. We asked our students after the game to describe our game in 3 words. And as you may see, the word fun was the most used. We also asked what they learned with this activity. And the majority of students, as you may see, also answered chemistry and how to perform scientific investigation. So our game met its educational goals. Although we do have another answer, that is history. And it's not surprising since the storytelling was the backbone of our activity. So if you want to learn more about this activity, our book chapter just came out. We explain how we did it, and it's called Chemistry Edutainment, a storytelling activity for middle school children. And I think I'm on time.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations. Sounds wonderful. Let's hear from Cynthia, please.
I'll stop my sharing.
Thank you.
And that's it.
So Cynthia will be addressing us with the idea about what's the value of alternative stories in scenario planning.
So I'm having a bit of a problem. Let me just check.
Okay. Okay, your screen is shared. Okay, perfect.
So I'm going to be talking about the value of alternative stories in scenario planning. And scenario planning is a form of planning that's done for the long term. It's related to strategic planning, but the thing is that it uses different stories to create these different scenarios or these different paths that can be taken. So it's important to use scenario planning, especially when we're talking about uncertain times. And uncertain times have been progressing recently. Every time something happens, things become more and more complex, and we're living in changing times. So there have been different ways in which we have been defining these changing times. So some authors refer to them as the VUCA times because they are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They're exponential. Changes happen faster and faster every time. They're really explosive, seismic, chaotic, turbulent, and now even pandemic. So these are all the changes that have been coming into play into these uncertain times. And scenario planning started in the US military, especially in the Cold War era. And it's correlated a bit with what was happening in terms of the politics of paranoia and the philosophy of suspicion and also conspiracy theory, because this also brings about more and more uncertainty. So scenario planning answers the question, what if, but also the question, what then? Meaning, if this happens, what are we going to do to solve the problems that emerge? And a scenario is basically a story. It can also be considered as an image or a map of what the possible future might bring. And it presents this interpretation of the present projected into the future. And it helps deal with organizational uncertainty. It's part of a strategic process and strategic thinking for learning and making decisions. And it can be applied to all types of organizations, all different contexts and time. And the most important thing is, because it's based on a story, it becomes really memorable. So people really connect to these stories. In creating the process of developing these different alternatives or these different scenarios to plan upon, it's really simple. You consider all the forces in the environment, what's going on in terms of politics, social changes, etc. You mix that with the uncertainties that are being felt at that moment. For instance, right now, the pandemic is one of the main uncertainties. Then based on that, you describe the characteristics for different elements on those forces and uncertainties, and you create different paths or alternative stories. In this way, you can end up with having an expected future, a preferred future, an alternative future, and also a feared future, the one that you would not want to have. But you consider all the different possibilities. And basically, you can start either with 2 scenarios, which would be the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. And you can have as many as 8 different scenarios, which are the combinations between them. Just to give you some examples, Shell, the company that provides oil and is now working in different types of energies, have been working for 40 years in developing scenarios. Right now, well, in 2011, they developed 2 possible worlds, basically 2 scenarios, best case and worst case. One was called the scramble and the other was called the blueprints. And the scramble is this world in which people are just looking to provide a good supply of energy regardless of the environment and other conditions. And the blueprint provides exactly the opposite example, in which the environment and the procuration of energy are aligned. So it means that public policies are really created, the interests of the organizations are aligned, etc. And in doing these 2 scenarios, what they used was analyze the economics, the geopolitics and sociocultural issues, the energy production, and also the environment, and the way in which the consumers were dealing with these issues, and also the public policy that was available. Another example is that of the Modular scenarios in South Africa. These were created in a moment of deep conflict and profound uncertainty, especially this, we're talking before the Mandela era. And they started creating these possible scenarios of how could they unite South Africa and they provide the best politics possible. So they created 4 different scenarios. As you can see, every scenario has a name, and that's important in this storytelling. Here they provided one that was the ostrich, then the lame dog, the Icarus, and the flight of the flamingos. The common element between all these scenarios are the fact that they have wings, that they can fly and do something for the future. But as you can see, some of these scenarios are really negative, such as the ostrich, in which people basically hide their head under the sand and do nothing. The lame duck, that they don't have what they need to success, and the Icarus, that they don't have the structure or the infrastructure to continue, and eventually the flight is ended. And the positive one, that's called the flight of the flamingo, in which everybody joins into the politics and they take a path of inclusive growth and democracy. Similarly to this was the Zimbabwe scenarios that started in 2010 and ended in 2012. And they created 4 different scenarios. One was the chameleon, that was this type of policies that really didn't show their colors, that adapted to the trends and were not true to who they were. Then the stone people, which was this ideal scenario in which they built something that was really strong, that would sustain the test of times. Then the locomotive, that kind of moved the country to a different setting, but it followed on very specific rails and did not go out of these rails, so it did not adapt to change. And the vulture state, which was kind of the worst, in which the state was taking whatever it could for its own benefit, making prey of everybody. We see examples also in higher education. For example, this is an example that was made in Australia, and they said that they could have either a champion university that was a university that could become the star at something, and therefore it can attract a lot of different students. Then the likely case that was the commercial university that they had different programs, a variety of offerings for everybody so that they can attract a larger variety of students. Then the disruptor university that they became really, really innovative and became one of a kind. So that would be the alternate case. And this was done in 2018. And at that moment, they thought that having a virtual university could be the extreme case. And now with the pandemic, we see that this was one of the realities because most universities had to turn online. Other examples is the DHL Delivering Tomorrow Logistics. They work on analyzing what the future of logistics would be for the world. And they analyze all these things, the GDP, the world flows, the quality of the environment, regulations, the potential of growth in logistics, new perspectives, and the transformation of logistics. And they came up with 5 scenarios. So one was this untamed economy, which was faced to impending collapse. Another idea was these mega efficiency mega cities in which you had drones delivering things and things like that. Other was customized lifestyle, in which the future took us to having 3D printers at home that you don't need to ask for things to be delivered to your house, but you can actually produce them there. Paralyzing protectionism was this kind of economy in which it was really towards nationalism, and the borders were closed up and you had to deliver only the goods that were available in a region. And the last one that was kind of the most open and the most positive, global resilience and local adaptation. The World Economic Forum has also provided scenarios for work, the future of work, and they came up with 8 different futures of work, depending on the access of technology and technological change, the learning evolution, how much people were learning about how to do their work, and of talent mobility, whether people were moving or they were moving online. And these are their 8 scenarios: the workforce autarkies, mass movements, robot replacement, polarized world, empower entrepreneurs, skill flows, productive locals, and agile adapters. Now with the pandemic, we also see scenarios being brought about, and these were made by the IMD just this year, and they analyzed 3 key factors. The virus longevity, is it going to be staying with us for long, or is it going to be ending soon? The global mindset with regards to how are we going to be dealing with these situations, the care that we need to take, whether the vaccines are going to be ready, etc., and the digital adoption, how much people are actually moving into work that can be done online. And they created these 4 scenarios, which are the global marketplace, going back to basics, the digital reset, and the walled gardens. And as I said, these are combinations on the 3 main factors that they provide. And basically, the true value of alternative stories is that they help plan in a better way, because we don't have just one possible future, but many. So if things change, we have the alternative of all the already having analyzed the risks associated with different scenarios, and we can make changes that are required very quickly. It helps policymakers anticipate change, prepare their responses, create more robust strategies. It also helps anticipate the impact of the different scenarios and analyze or identify the main weaknesses so that they can be arranged. They can develop a sense of risk assessment and crisis readiness so that if things progress, for example, right now with a pandemic, people can do something and change eventually. So by using these alternative stories, businesses are becoming more proactive and less reactive to events because they know all the possibilities that can happen. And this is a response to ever-changing and uncertain environments such as the ones that we're living in right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Dora, Professor Dora and Cynthia. So I believe we're all talking about this parallel reality from Cynthia's side. Cynthia's side is more about the future, and on Dora's point of view is more connected with the past. So I think I could begin with you, Dora, please. Picking this nice expression from Professor Cynthia, expect the best and prepare for the worst. How do you integrate this very safe and very optimistic way of doing things in your work that relies upon this parallel reality of the past?
So this was a different project. It's separated from my PhD thesis, but I think it is really useful. This activity is really useful because we can sense an evolution in science. One of the experiments that we did, we put like a hair sample and asked students, so can we use this as evidence? And they go, yes, of course, DNA testing. And we were like, okay, but this is 1819, so you can't. What should we do about it? And they thought and thought and thought and go, okay, maybe we can see the color, maybe we can see where it's from, its ethnicity, if it's from a white person or wherever. And but to do that with microscopes, were microscopes developed at that time? Perhaps not with such a great power. So perhaps a hair sample wasn't that useful as it is today. So by bringing the past, we can bring a sense of evolution of science, but not only science, but other subjects. I don't know if I answered your question with this example.
In this past tense point of view, I got very curious in your gamification. Are they digital, mainly digital? Can they? This is a board game, but can they either be digital? I mean, what's the how big can it be?
It was designed for that Universidade Junior.
Okay.
So it has
Are you going to market it?
I don't think so. I really would like it, but I don't think, because the game you can only play it once.
Okay.
Because you tell the story, the students and analyze their samples, they come up with the answer, so the answer is always the same. So it's not a thing it could be on the market. No. Sorry.
Dora, I believe ethics was a key central role in the development of that exciting game.
Yes.
Can you explain us a little bit more about how big was your concern in ethical values?
So can I share my screen again? I think it's easier.
I think so. Yeah. And that's and Professor Cynthia, that's another the issue. The ethical issue is another point that I would like to confront you with, because we're talking about the future. Okay, I'll get back to you, Professor Cynthia. Let's see the
sorry,
Dora's presentation.
So,
okay.
This is our characters from the house. So this is Família Sampaio, and this kid got poisoned, Mário Sampaio. So you see over here, this character is Pestana da Silva. This, in the real life, he was the prosecutor of the case.
Okay.
We thought that ethics would be a really difficult subject for 12-year-olds, so we limited our ethical conundrum to conflicts of interest. So this character, Pestana da Silva, in real life, had a previous love affair with Maria das Dores, and she was the wife of the suspect on trial. So we asked our kids, is this right? Should this guy be on trial? Should this guy be conducting the trial against Vicente de Freitas, who was being judged?
So this is a moral dilemma.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just one example. We have another example here in the labs where the characters, in real life, the tests were done in 2 labs, one in Porto and the other one in Coimbra. The person responsible for the laboratory in Coimbra was a colleague of Vicente Urbino de Freitas in real life. So here we have another conflict of interest. This person shouldn't be the one doing the analysis of the samples that were used to accuse Vicente Urbino de Freitas.
I believe this ethical issue, Professor Cynthia, is a bit more complicated on your side, because we're talking about the present, we're talking about the future, and we're also talking about big organizations displayed in a big period of time. How important, I believe it is, but how crucial is the ethical point of view on your scenario planning?
In fact, it can be used in all sizes of businesses. Even small businesses are using scenario planning now, so it doesn't have to do with large businesses. And the ethics come right from the beginning. When you start analyzing the forces that are going to come into the different uncertainties and the characteristics of the scenarios, that's the moment in which ethics come into play. Because you know that every time you create a scenario, good things and bad things are going to happen, and it's going to be affecting certain stakeholders. So ethics is of essence in all scenarios.
But I believe you have very strong forces pushing you, trying to influence your work into diverse directions. It's, I believe it's not very easy to go through.
It's not very easy because we're talking about uncertainties. So these are possibilities. It doesn't mean that they're going to happen. So also the ethical aspects can also change. So you might choose one scenario and eventually something might happen because the forces in the environment are continuously changing. So you will need to adjust the ethics for that scenario, whether that scenario comes to be realized, yes.
When you develop your scenario planning, or 4 kinds of different scenarios or 8, do you normally address or present them to the top level of the corporation or to the entire organization, and how do they react towards these different possibilities in the future? Because in Professor Dora's case, people have fun. We're talking about edutainment, right? People understand and acquire knowledge while having fun. Because we're talking about 12 years old. I believe your target audience, Professor Cynthia, is a little bit higher, right? Yes,
but it's also still about having fun. It's about creating these stories, and it's about fantasizing about the future. It's almost like thinking like you're Jules Verne, imagining this travel to the moon or to the depths of the sea. So it's really about fantasizing, and in doing that, you also have fun. And it involves not just the people inside the organization, but also different stakeholders from the outside that have a different perspective or a different vision of where the future, a specific area or a specific business might go. So these sessions really become really fun because people start telling these stories that are completely absurd, maybe, or that are fun, or that have different dimensions to fantasy and things like that. So it really is fun to have this session. It becomes gaming.
And also very dynamic, because as soon as you present your job in the long term or in the middle term, they tend to move from scenario B to scenario B, A, B, or C, correct?
Yes.
And how do people adjust? Are they flexible to this? Like for instance, perhaps we're supposing that we'll be addressing scenario number 3, but then comes COVID-19, and then we have to move to scenario C. Are they people agile enough?
Yes, that's the idea about scenario planning. They provide this idea of flexibility. You know that these are all the possibilities and that you need to move from one to another because you don't know which one is the one that's going to become true. And maybe none of them become true and you have a different alternative also. But at least you were open to the possibilities and you were able to assess different risks, different ethical concerns, different economic concerns too of what might happen, and you planned ahead for whatever might happen. So it's what if and what then?
Sure. So it's always a game, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's just like a game, yes, because you don't know what's going to happen in the end. So it's playing the odds.
And unlike the game about Professor Dora presented us, you don't have winners with you, Professor Cynthia, do you?
No, you don't. Maybe inside the organization, people might say, you were kind of the closest to defining what happened. But since this is a very long-term planning, you plan for the next 10 years, 20 years.
I'm sorry to ask you, Dita, have you ever been consulted by an astrologist?
No.
Because you're
more or less the same, yes.
Well, but with a lot more grounded basis, I think astrologists would be helpful with that, right?
Yeah, guessing all the possibilities, yes.
Yeah, I really like your idea of being more proactive and less reactive. This is a very sharp, rational mindset. How do you, as we're not like that, we're part emotional, part rational. How do you tend people to follow that way of thinking?
When you consider all the possibilities, when you're able to assess different risks, you're able to kind of look ahead. So it's easier to have a response for what you will do then, because you can have the response right now, because you're kind of futuring. You're taking that insight into what might be, into these what ifs. So it's easier because it's as you can have some information beforehand. Although this information is just probable, it's not exact.
Okay. So it may affect your decision making, right? So you can make better decisions according to different scenarios and your variables up ahead.
Yes, precisely.
That is really
because you have all the opportunities laid out before you, so you can identify what you might do if something happens.
Curiosity from my side, Professor Cynthia, normally how many scenarios do you have? I've understood from 3 to 8. Are they, in a general way, are they more pessimist or optimist?
Normally you have kind of half and half.
Okay.
And you even can have a neutral scenario. You start with 2, which is kind of the worst case scenario and the best possible scenario. Okay. And then you start mixing. But normally you have the same amount of positive, negative, and neutral so that you can move along. Because sometimes scenario planning also helps not just to prepare for the worst, but also to prepare for positive effects of dangerous scenarios.
Sure. And these possible scenarios, Professor Dora, I believe you chose this specific history time in history to be the base of your storytelling game, right?
Yes. Yes.
How did you decide that period? Is it a personal choice? Is it a science-based information, or do you have other times in history in which you want to base new storytellings for new games?
I think, well, with this structure, you can adapt almost any story. But you do have to make several adaptations according to your audience and the subject you are talking about. But this was kind of a casual encounter. It was me and my co-author, José, who's not here. He was at the time studying António Ferreira da Silva. And it was a really interesting chemist in Portugal. I think he has a name in one of the rooms in Faculdade de Ciências. So he was really an important chemistry. He founded, I think, Sociedade Portuguesa de Química. So it's a Portuguese
so I'm sure he has a room here, yeah.
He founded the Portuguese Society of Chemistry. Besides this case, he had another interesting intervention on Porto's wine.
Okay.
When we are starting to export a lot of port wine to Brazil, and some of them were fraudulent, I think. And with his chemistry tests, he could identify which wine was true, the one who were produced correctly, and the ones who were fraudulent. So he did a lot of work on chemistry, and it was a casual encounter, but I think it was a really happy one.
Yeah. And would it be possible in your work to use future science as the base of your storytelling, so to predict the future?
I don't think for future prediction, because it worked. The story worked really well because it was real. Although we did change it a few steps to incorporate the ethical conundrums and the laboratory experiments. But I think it really worked because it was a real story, and our students were really surprised that this story was real, or kind of real. And it really had an impact on them, and it was noticeable that.
Okay. Yeah. Professor Cynthia, your clients, I think they're clients, do they get back to you after you have planned the future correctly for them?
Normally what happens is that because it takes too long, because the planning can be done for 10 or 20 years, it's quite likely that it would be somebody else coming back to them and seeing what happened. But yes, I've been participating with different companies, but I've never seen the full scenarios come to life because it will be a very, very long time.
Long time, yeah. Don't you have a shorter period?
The thing is that because it's strategic planning and long-term planning, it has to do in that way. So you, for example, the scenario planning for logistics, it was done for a period of 30 years, I think. I did not participate in any of these examples, by the way. These are just examples that some of them have already fulfilled their time and finished. And
most of them were African. For any particular, two of them, yeah?
African.
None was European.
No, I think American, African, Australian, from different regions.
So the Europeans do not predict the future?
No, some of the shell scenarios consider also, for example, fuels and energy in Europe. So they consider that problem worldwide. The scenarios from DHL, well, DHL actually was done by the Dutch Post, so that's German.
Okay.
But they predict the scenarios not just for a specific region. Some of them consider the whole world. So the ones for logistics, the one about the pandemic was done by the IMD. The IMD is a Swiss institution, so it's also European. And you can have them either working globally or just scenarios to be applied in a local setting. So that's basically a decision that you take. And these are just examples from different, just to show that it can be done in any area, such as education. It can be done in politics, public policy. It can be done to develop new businesses. So there's a wide range of possibilities that can be used for these alternative stories as scenario planning.
Yeah, companies do that very often. Big companies do this prediction of for 5 years or 7 years to study how the marketplace is going to be like, what's the trends. So you're in a way you're presenting new trends, right?
Scenario planning is not a new trend. We need to understand that this started after the Cold War era, and the first published scenarios came out around 1970. So this is not really new.
No. I mean, the results of your studies, they are for your clients as you can show them as new trends they will be facing in in years to come.
Yes, you consider everything that might happen in the future. Yes.
Yeah, I was curious about the names.
They always
scenario names.
You try to select names that kind of stick, that have something to them, that also reflect this imagery of what might be contained in that scenario. And sometimes they just choose things that are fun, or things that connect to something that they are already used, or something in the environment. So for instance, for the one in South Africa, they use, for example, the ostrich. They use the flamingos that they have there. So they kind of connect in part to their tradition, to their history,
to their culture.
The part of the Zimbabwe scenarios too. They chose this idea of the stone men because that's also inscribed in their tradition and in their culture, the idea of the strong men that are made of stone, that are resistant to the pass of time and things like that.
Okay. Professor Laura?
Yes.
New games. Are we gonna have new on your side?
I don't think so. I have my PhD thesis to finish, so and not anytime soon, no. But I would really like to continue this one, try in a larger sample. We did, this was just a pilot study, so we need to implement
a successful one.
Yeah, I think so. It was, the kids really enjoyed the game, and we did as well. So maybe it's the future perspectives here are to try it again in a bigger sample with other conditions, and who knows, maybe it will happen. COVID-19 is making it hard, so this one was the last edition, the Universidade Junior. This year it didn't happen, so we don't have a place to test our kids to test.
Is it possible to test it online?
No, because it has hands-on experience. They do the samples, and so it can, but it won't be as fun or as interactive as it would be online in live. Because the kids really, they experiment, they touch with gloves, obviously. They touch the samples, they do the procedures, they have like a little notebook, a laboratory notebook, so they can follow the experiments. So it's better doing for them to do themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the opportunity of having them digital on the digital channel would be most interesting. Would be most interesting to follow, because more people would be edutained and acquiring knowledge.
Yeah, but it's not the same thing when you have hands-on experience and you have to put it online. It's just another chemistry class. So it doesn't make the same impact, because this game is a whole package. Has different layers, and the storytelling, the hands-on experience, the questions, and they have to fulfill a laboratory report and a game report and tell at each step who do they think was the murderer. So it's a whole package, and it's not, if we're going to put this online, we would have to change a lot of things, and a lot of things would be missed from the game.
And of course, the crime plot could be changed into adventure or romance.
No, the thing is, The thing is, this worked because the kids didn't have internet access, and we did change the name of the characters. So this case, if you Google Urbino de Freitas, you will get all the information from the case. So we changed the name of the character to Vicente de Freitas. So because we did have a lunch break, and the kids were allowed to use their phones. So we changed the name so they won't Google the name and know the answer beforehand. Okay.
Some time ago, you told me that this histories, this periods of history that you selected was quite personal, and you won't be develop this this gamification again. But the idea is, I think, it's quite interesting, and I think you could merge it into the Professor Cynthia's future quests.
And in fact, gaming is such a huge trend in education at all levels. So things like that, yes. And people really get the hold and learn a lot more from these game experiences, because as you said, this is more a hands-on approach. People really get invested into these things, and it's part of the co-creation of the solutions.
Do you believe that education, as we understand it today, is moving towards this more entertaining idea of or way of being, Professor?
I think so. And I have seen it, for instance, we've seen even things like Lego being introduced into higher education. We have these Lego serious playthings in which you learn about organizations or about quality or about different things, even digital games, and they are being introduced in the form of modeling tools and things like that. So yes, more and more we're introducing this because people get more invested than in just a traditional lecture.
Sure. They seem to be, they need to be reinvented, I feel.
Yeah.
But sure perhaps lecturers are not as familiar with gaming as students are.
Yes, but that's also part of the adaptation process. We're seeing these changes come about. And of course, not all type of lectures or not all type of topics will fit into these gaming activities, but most of them might. And this creates a new kind of learning that becomes really more interesting and more attractive to the students.
Sure, because they're having fun. They're humans. And your clients, your 30 years old, 40, 50, 60-year-old clients, I think they are also a target for this edutainment technique.
Sure, more and more consulting activities also are including games, because people get more invested while they're having fun.
And what sort of games? Digital or board games?
No, it could be board games, but for instance, Lego is one of the ones that we use a lot. We use also construction techniques, that you have different materials and you have to build different things that are useful for team building activities or for a demonstration of leadership. We also have things in which people have to also build, but connect what they build to what other people are doing. Things that have to do with solution to different specific problems, and then it's kind of a board game in which you progress as more solutions are provided and things like that. So that's really useful, and that makes these consulting sessions go kind of really fast, and people really enjoy themselves and people connect to each other, because these sessions help also to provide that, the human connection.
The human connection is it's fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental, because people they are fed up of having meetings, and then comes the consultant, and when the consultant meeting arrives, okay, this stands for something interesting, about knowledge, about good entertainment, having fun, which well, it helps a lot to learn better in order to how do you say, to predict the future and expecting the best.
And in these gaming activities, especially those that are hand-on, it's actually the participants who are creating the solutions. So whatever they do really stick because they made it. So it's not like somebody else came and imposed certain ideas, but the same people who are working there are the ones creating these solutions, these alternatives, these games, these activities. So they are more and more invested because they're the solution.
Did you have that experience, Professor Dora?
Yes. They feel like I came up with a solution. Maybe I'm not dumb, or maybe I can be a scientist one day. It really had an impact. And for instance, the game Professor Cynthia didn't mention, but I think when you fulfill a task, you feel like, oh, I accomplished something, and you feel happy about it. So what you learn, it will stick because of it. The fulfillment, because you think you you have the fulfillment sentiment.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And there's this emotional connection.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
The
And
bonds.
because of the emotional connection, it stays.
Yes.
Something that you will not forget.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, this parallel reality is the ground base, has always been the ground base for our human activity in history, science, in case of Professor Dora, predicting how could be the future in different scenarios, possible alternative possibilities. This is all about escape from the reality, which is not very common in our urban day-to-day job. And I think it's quite interesting for people to be open to understand what if situations. Correct.
Because we transform it into stories. People love stories. People are always hearing stories. So if you present an alternative scenario through a story, people will listen, as Professor Cynthia said. I think that's it. That's the answer. Yeah.
And they're memorable, so people will remember, and they will remember more than if you just were assigned a specific task or being told a specific topic or things like that, because the story becomes so memorable.
Yeah.
And Professor Cynthia, tell me, getting back again to the ethical issue, once you're predicting the future or expecting it or designing it or new different possibilities, how do you understand what ethical values will be available in these upcoming futures?
Of course, this is not predicting the future. Hopefully we could, but it's completely impossible. It's just identify all the possibilities. But what you do is, for instance, if you have into consideration the ethical part based on sustainability, caring for the environment. So you'll see where are the fuels and the different energies coming from in the future. How can we create energies that will not damage, or in the opposite case, what are the things that are going to be very damaging to the environment in terms of these same energies? So you consider the ethics of it. But for every single scenario that you establish, you need to consider the ethics.
Sure, because but you're not
changing.
Yeah, but when you consider, you're unlike Professor Dora, you're not you don't know that they will exist.
No. You assume and you kind of determine the possibilities of it existing. Of course, if you're talking about things like sustainability or work or human dignity and things like that, you know more or less what should happen or what the ideal should be. And you can consider that as the basis to establish the ethical considerations.
Yeah, can you share with us this surprise that you might have had on those experience on setting trends to this organization? Have you ever had this? Have you ever got surprised with the reality that wasn't predicted?
For example, if you consider right now the scenarios that have been planned for the pandemic, you realize that there are a lot of different ethical considerations that were never planned for. For instance, we're thinking about curing the disease, but at the same time, we're having a lot of pollution being the result of using all these protective gear. So that has ethical considerations. That's something that we need to plan for the future, because this is going to kind of accumulate through the months and the years. So what will we do with that then? We were moving towards a world without plastics. And all of a sudden we went back to plastics because of all the disposable gear.
Yeah, but for instance, if you're predicting on 2019 last year, nobody was expecting, not the Spanish Inquisition as the Monty Pythons, but nobody was expecting COVID-19. So I believe all sorts of scenarios didn't include this pandemic. And then it all happened very suddenly. How quick was the adjustment? How flexible were people to face this new reality?
I think it was
because
really
it wasn't predicted.
It was not predicted, but we had the precedent of the H1N1 problem. So it was, of course, a smaller scale, but here, for instance, in Mexico, we went into a shutdown of 2 weeks when that occurred. So this was not something that would never be present again. Once we had that precedent, it's quite possible when you consider scenarios that that might happen again in the future. So, of course, we're talking more about the health sector considering these possibilities rather than all of the businesses. So for some of the business that might be something that might never happen or something that they might never consider. But still, when you have this precedent, you need to look ahead from that precedent. When you analyze all those trends, you're analyzing all what had happened in the past and how that can project into the future. That's the basic of scenarios.
Yeah, but sometimes what happened might not happen again. How do you discard this circumstance or another one?
It depends on the context, the type of business you're in, and what the trends are saying. Of course, you need to consider global trends, what's happening in the world, what's happening in other countries, maybe to look at the examples of somebody who had already gone through that path and how they did it. That also helps. And that was done a lot in the African scenarios. How did other countries made the transition to a democracy and things like that? So you're looking also at what happened in the past to predict what might happen in the future if you take certain alternatives.
Thank you. Okay, Professor Cynthia, Professor Dora, for me it was an absolute privilege to have the chance of hearing your researches and getting to know your knowledge. Thank you so much for your time. I think we're getting close to our agenda. I also would like to thank Professor Anna Moore for the invitation of being here and congratulate her for this amazing second international meeting of What If at the Universidade do Porto. I hope it will have this third edition and fourth. And for people at home, you can still enroll at the final event of this meeting. It will be this kind of literary salon about História Alternativa. Please join us. You just have to enroll at the website, and the fabulous event will start at 7:30. Professor Cynthia, was a pleasure. I wish you all the best. Professor Dora, likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.